The thing about retiring to the edge of nowhere is that eventually, nowhere finds you. Elder Rogthar Bloodgut had been warlord of the Gristlefang clan for 37 years, which, in Orc terms, meant he'd survived approximately 14,000 attempts on his life and at least 6 major digestive disasters. He'd earned his name by literally gutting a rival with his bare teeth during a particularly spirited debate about fishing rights. So when his scouts reported a human settlement at the mountain's edge, he'd expected the usual: screaming, fleeing, and the satisfying crunch of poorly made doors. What he hadn't expected was the smell of fresh bread.
They're doing what?
Rogthar's tusks gleamed in the firelight of the war camp.
Baking, sir,
repeated Rock, his least incompetent scout.
The one with gray hair. She's got loaves cooling on racks. Smells like...
Rock's nostril flared with something dangerously close to longing.
Like the heavenly afterlife is supposed to be, but with cinnamon.
Something else nagged at Rock, a feeling of being watched during the entire scouting mission. Twice he'd found their trail marker subtly moved, turned just enough to either be accident or insult. But that was impossible. Humans didn't play such games, did they? Rogthar's scarred face twisted.
And their defenses? Well, there is a fence, made of wood, with flowers growing on it. Flowers? Yes, sir, purple ones.
Rock hesitated.
And the priestess and gave a sermon while we watched. Something about the impermanence of spoons. The villagers just nodded like it made sense.
In all his years of warfare, Rogthar had never been so thoroughly insulted. These soft skins had settled in his mountains. Mountains where wind could strip flesh from bone, where even dragons flew carefully. And they were growing flowers. They were baking.
Ready the war parties,
he growled.
We strike at dawn. We will show these petty humans who the scariest in the valley is.
Young Kaleida bounced on her heels excitedly. This would be her first real raid. Her chance to prove herself worthy of clan tattoos. She'd sharpened her axe. She'd practiced her war cry until the mountain goats fled in terror. She was ready for glory. She was not ready for brandy hail. Dawn came to the village of Last Rest like it did every morning, reluctantly, as if the sun itself needed coffee before dealing with another day. The 24 cottages huddled together against the mountain wind, smoke rising from chimneys in lazy spirals. It looked exactly like what it was supposed to be, a place where tired people went to be left alone. Rock had noted more than he'd reported. The gray-haired baker woman moved with the economy of motion that made his warrior instincts twitch. Each gesture deliberate, nothing wasted. Her arms, though dusted with flour, had the corded look of old rope under tension. And the way she'd handled that oven paddle, with the same unthinking respect most warriors reserved for their favorite weapons. The Orcs came over the ridge in perfect formation, 300 warriors strong, their war cries echoing off the peaks. They charged down the slope with the confidence of an avalanche, ready to sweep away everything in their path. The first sign of trouble was the shepherd. He stood in their path, an old human with a crook and a truly magnificent mustache, watching them approach with the mild interest of someone observing unusual weather. As the front line of orcs bore down on him, he sighed, adjusted his hat, and yanked on what looked like a piece of yarn. The hillside exploded. Not with fire or magic, but with an orchestra of mechanical violence. Hidden springs launched logs sideways. Concealed pits opened like hungry mouths. Tripwires activated in sequence, turning the charge into a catastrophic display of orcs discovering gravity in new and educational ways. Kaleida, running near the front, had just enough time to think, that's not fair. before a tree branch swung out of nowhere and introduced itself to her sternum.
Treachery!
Rugthar thought, even as his warriors tumbled past him like green, very confused bowling balls.
Cowardice!
Common sense, actually, said a voice behind him. The warlord spun to find a human perched on a boulder, spinning a dagger between his fingers. The man had the lean, dangerous look of someone who'd picked far too many locks and fought far too few fights fairly. Tanner's the name, the rogue said conversationally. He used to do wet work for the Southport Guild. You ever heard of the Thornwood incident? Rugthar had. Everyone had. The entire duchy's succession had been derailed by one assassin, 3 letters, in a strategically placed wheel of cheese.
That was you?
Guilty. Though in my defense, I was very drunk, and she was very married. Tanner's grin had too many teeth. Now, you could try to gut me, but... He gestured at the chaos below. It seems like you've got bigger problems. Rugthar looked. His warriors hadn't been killed. They'd been humiliated. Orcs dangled from snares, covered in what appeared to be honey and feathers. Orcs had charged straight into full walls of illusion, smacking face first into solid stone they couldn't see. One entire unit was trapped in a massive net, suspended between 2 trees, spinning slowly while a villager below poked them with a very long stick.
Magic users!
Rugthar bellowed. Just one, actually, Tanner noted. Father Silas. Lovely fellow. A bit touched in the head ever since he exorcised a demon by making itself laugh to death. His words were, and I quote, "Why did the demon cross the planar boundary? To get to the other procession." Rugthar stared.
That is not how exorcisms work.
Tell that to the demon.
That joke is not even funny,
Rugthar said. Tanner shrugged. A new sound cut through the morning air. The ring of steel on steel. Rugthar's best warriors had reached the village proper, where surely they would find easy prey among the human dwellings. Instead, they found Brandy. She stood in the doorway of her bakery, a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair tied back in a practical bun. She wore a flour-dusted apron over chainmail that had seen better decades. In one hand, she held what had once been a mighty warhammer, since repurposed into an oven paddle. Steam rose from the fresh loaves behind her. 3 orc warriors charged to position, axes raised, tusks bared in anticipation of an easy kill. Brandy sighed the sigh of someone who specifically moved here to avoid this sort of thing. The first orc swung down with enough force to split a tree. Brandy stepped inside his reach, used his momentum to flip him over her hip, and brought the hammer paddle down on his helmet with a sound like a gong being rung by an angry god. He crumpled. The second orc tried to flank her. She grabbed a pot of boiling water from her doorstep, because of course she'd prepared boiling water. She wasn't an amateur, and introduced it to his face. His scream was more surprised than pained. The third orc, learning from his brother's mistakes, tried to keep his distance. Brandy rolled her eyes, picked up one of her cooling loaves, and threw it. The iron-hard crust caught him between the eyes. He went down like divine judgment had been baked at 350 degrees for 45 minutes.
My bread,
she muttered, retrieving the weapon.
That was for the Hendersons. Oh, but I guess it's my own fault.
Across the village square, Father Silas emerged from the temple, took in the scene of the battle, and began to laugh. It wasn't a pleasant sound. It was the laugh of someone who'd seen the cosmic joke and found it hilarious in all the wrong ways.
Ha ha! Morning, visitors!
He called out, his voice carrying that particular tone of cheer that made wise people nervous.
How delightful! Tell me, do you need any healing? No? Well, you will!
An orc charged him. Silas raised one hand, spoke a single word, and the orc's axe turned into a bouquet of daisies. Looks like he was having an existential crisis. Silas explained to no one in particular, then clubbed the confused orc with his prayer book. A tome thick enough to stun a troll and annotated with comments like, citation needed, and contradicts page 234. Typical. The battle, such as it was, lasted exactly 18 minutes. By the end, not a single orc had died, but 300 of them wished they had. They sat in the village square, disarmed, demoralized, and inexplicably covered in flour, honey, feathers, or some combination thereof. Kaleida found herself zip-tied. Zip-tied? What kind of rope was this? Next to a fountain, watching the gray-haired baker woman pass out water to defeated warriors.
"Drink,"
Brandy instructed, her tone broking no argument.
"Dehydration makes the headaches worse."
You give water to enemies?
Kaleida managed.
"You're not enemies. You're just some idiots who interrupted my morning bake."
Brandy paused, considering.
"Though I do suppose there is some overlap."
Rugthar was brought forward, his hands bound with what looked like ordinary rope, but felt like it had opinions about escaping. The human defenders parted to let him through, and he found himself face to face with their leaders.
I am Rugthar Bloodgod,
he announced, salvaging what dignity he could.
warlord of the Gristlefang clans, render of the Bonehammer tribe, victor of...
Yes, very impressive. Tanner interrupted. I'm sure your mother's very proud. Tea?
What?
Tea. Leaf water, good for constitution. The rogue was already pouring. We've got mint, chamomile, or something Silas calls enlightenment brew, but I'm pretty sure it's just mushrooms.
It's not just mushrooms,
Silas protested.
There's also a hint of lavender and a splash of divine revelation. We came to conquer you,
Rugthar said slowly, as if explaining to particularly dense children.
Yes, we noticed,
Brandy replied.
The war cries really gave it away. Very melodic. The harmony on the second verse was actually quite good.
We are warriors! You are supposed to flee!
Did that for 40 years, actually, Tanner said. Gets old. It's bad for the knees.
We could have killed you all!
Could have tried, Brandy agreed. Would have failed, but points for enthusiasm.
Rugthar's eye twitched. In 37 years of warfare, he had never been so thoroughly confused.
You're not, afraid?
Afraid?
Brandy set down her pitcher of water and really looked at him for the first time. Behind her eyes, Rugthar saw something that made his warrior instinct scream warnings. Wasn't cruelty or bloodlust. Those he understood. It was the weary competence of someone who'd already won this fight 100 times and was tired of having to prove it.
Warlord Rugthar, she said quietly. I once held the pass at Carrow's Deep for 6 days with 13 soldiers and a goat. I've killed dragons, Spanish demons, and stood before the gods themselves. I've lost everything worth losing and kept going anyway. I moved here for peace and quiet, to bake bread and grow old without any more blood on my hands.
She leaned forward slightly.
Do you really want to be the reason that I go back to work?
The square was silent, except for Silas's continued giggling and the splash of one orc fainting into the fountain.
Rugthar swallowed. We seem to have misunderstood the situation.
Happens to the best of us, Tanner said cheerfully. More tea? The terms of Kaleida's education were simple, humiliating, and non-negotiable.
You want to learn our secrets,
Brandy had said, making air quotes that somehow conveyed both mockery and pity.
Fine. You pull your weight, Follow village law, and maybe you'll understand why we're still breathing. Village law, as it turned out, consisted primarily of 1. No killing. It's boring. 2. No stealing. Expected. 3. No bothering Mrs. Henderson's chickens. Oddly specific. 4. Mandatory participation in weekly game night. Wait, what?
Game night, eh?
Kaleida stared at the posted rules.
That's a law?
Oh, yeah,
said Marta, the village blacksmith who looked like she bench-pressed anvils for fun and probably did.
ever since the Pictionary incident of '03, Father Silas nearly started a holy war over whether ineffable was a valid drawing prompt.
It has no physical form.
Silas protested from across the square.
That was the entire theological point.
It was a duck.
Marta stage whispered.
He drew a duck.
3 weeks into her reluctant education, Kaleida had learned several disturbing things about humans. First, they cheated. Constantly. Not in the obvious, brutish way of hiding aces or weighted dice, but in ways that made you question reality itself. Tanner had taught her 17 ways to win a fight before it started, including convince them they've already lost and become their therapist. But some lessons came unexpectedly. Old Mr. Henderson had found her struggling with human letters one evening, trying to read Brandy's recipe notes.
Here, lass,
he said, settling beside her with the patience of a grandfather.
The trick is to see the shapes as little pictures. This one's a snake, you see, and this one's a mountain.
He'd spent hours teaching her, sharing stories of teaching his own grandchildren, all gone now, moved to distant cities.
You remind me of my granddaughter,
he said.
Same determined scowl when something doesn't make sense immediately.
She'd laughed, and he'd patted her shoulder with hands worn smooth by years of honest work.
The world's changing, young one. Maybe it's changing for the better, eh?
Second, they thought sideways. When Kaleida had asked Brandy about battle tactics, the woman had made her reorganize the entire bakery inventory.
I don't understand,
Kaleida had complained, flour in her tusks.
What does sorting bread have to do with war?
Everything,
Brandy replied.
You've got 20 loaves, 3 types, 10 customers coming, different preferences, different coins. How do you serve everyone before the bread goes stale?
I sell what I have.
And when Lord Fancy Pants wants the artisan sourdough you ran out of?
Tell him to take what's available.
Congratulations, you've just started a civil war. Try again.
It took Kaleida 6 attempts to realize the answer. You don't solve the bread problem, you solve the customer problem. You find out what they really want. Not bread, but status, comfort, tradition, and give them that instead.
Now,
Brandy had said,
apply that to 300 angry orcs.
The third and most disturbing thing Kaleida had learned was that humans remembered everything.
She's getting soft,
Granger snarled, watching from the tree line as Kaleida helped Tanner reset his trap network.
Playing with the meat sacks.
From another vantage point, hidden in the rocks above, Rugthar watched the same scene. Something hot and violent stirred in his chest. The old warlord instinct screaming that this was weakness, corruption, the destruction of everything orc. He saw Kaleida laugh at something the human had said. Saw her taking notes with the same intensity she'd once reserved for weapon drills. His hand went to his sword.
And this,
the old voice whispered.
Restore order, maintain strength.
But then he saw Brandy emerge from the bakery, and the way Kaleida straightened with something that wasn't fear, but respect. The kind of respect he'd once commanded through violence alone, given freely here for the price of wisdom and flour-dusted hands. Rukthar forced his hand away from his weapon, confused by his own hesitation. When had he started seeing alternatives to strength? When had he begun to question? Below, unaware of either observation, Kaleida continued her lesson.
Rukthar's lost his spine too.
Ugluk agreed with Granger. The scarred orc spat in the underbrush.
Making observations, learning the strategies, but the only strategy is strength.
Below them, Kaleida was laughing, actually laughing, as Tanner explained how he'd once ended a siege by convincing the attacking army they were haunted by their own guilt. See, the beauty of psychological warfare, the rogue was saying, is that everyone's already carrying the weapons in their own head. You just have to point it at themselves.
That's horrible,
Kaleida said, but she was taking notes. It gets better. You see, once they've started confessing to each other, Granger had heard enough.
Tonight,
He decided.
we take 50 warriors. No warnings, no mercy. Show them what real orcs do. And Rukthar has made his choice. He can die with his new friends.
Brandy knew something was wrong the moment the goat stopped eating armor. Bessie was the village's unofficial mascot, a cantankerous old nanny goat who developed a taste for metal after years of magical contamination. She had never met a piece of armor she wouldn't at least attempt to digest. But tonight, she stood in the square, ears flat, staring at the darkness beyond the village borders.
Trouble?
Silas materialized beside her, because of course he did. The cleric had a 6th sense for impending violence and a 7th sense for making it worse. Maybe. Brandy tested the weight of her hammer. After 3 weeks of peace, it felt strange in her hands. Wake the others, quietly.
Oh, good.
Silas said brightly.
I was getting bored.
Did you know that without immediate mortal peril, I have been forced to contemplate the nature of existence?
It is terribly inconvenient.
I've written 37 theological papers, and I have burned 36 of them. What happened to the last one?
I'm still writing it. It's about the metaphysical implications of this conversation.
Silas?
Waking the others, yes. Right away, of course, yes. Though I should mention that quietly is relative when Marta snores like a dragon with sinus problems.
He vanished in that unsettling way of his, leaving Brandy alone with the goat and her memories. Her hand found the locket at her throat. Small, silver, containing a portrait she hadn't looked at in years, but could see again when she closed her eyes. Not again, she thought. I am too old for another war. But her hands were already moving, checking weapons, tallying resources, calculating angles of attack. Some reflexes never died, no matter how deep you buried them. The first scream came from the Henderson cottage. Kaleida woke to the sound of steel and fury. She rolled from her cot in the barn, grabbing her axe on instinct, and stumbled into chaos. 50 orc warriors had breached the village perimeter, avoiding the known traps through sheer familiarity. They moved with brutal efficiency, torching buildings, cutting down any resistance. This wasn't a raid, it was an extermination. She saw Granger corner old Mr. Henderson, gentle Mr. Henderson who taught her letters, who'd said the world was changing for the better, and raised his axe for the killing blow. The old man didn't cower. He stood straight, meeting death with the same patient dignity he'd shown teaching an enemy to read. Kaleida's body moved before her mind could catch up.
Stop!
Granger turned, saw her, and smiled with too many teeth.
Little traitor. Good. You can watch them burn before you join them. These people aren't warriors. There's no honor in this. Honor? They destroyed our honor. Made us look weak. Made us doubt. They die for that.
He swung at Henderson, Kaleida intercepted, axes clashing in a shower of sparks. Around them, the village erupted into violence. But this time, the humans weren't ready. This time, people were dying.
You've gone soft.
Granger snarled, driving her back with heavy blows.
Forgotten who you are. I have remembered what we could be.
Their axes locked. Granger leaned in close, breath hot with rage.
Then you can die screaming.
He headbutted her. Classic orc technique. Kaleida's vision exploded in stars. She stumbled back, tasted blood, saw Granger's axe descending. And then Brandy was there. The retired paladin moved like poetry written in violence. She flowed under Granger's swing, brought her hammer up in an arc that shattered his tusk and most of his assumptions about physics. He spun, dazed, and she followed up with an elbow to his solar plexus that folded him like bad origami.
Stay down,
she advised, then helped Kaleida to her feet.
Are you okay?
Yes. The others
Are handling themselves. Look.
Kaleida looked. The surprise attack had become significantly less surprising. Tanner had turned the village square into a killbox of psychological warfare. Illusions of dead relatives accused attackers of dishonor. The ground itself seemed to shift and lie, making every step uncertain. One orc was curled in a ball, sobbing about his mother's disappointment. Father Silas stood atop the temple, glowing with divine wrath and cackling like the world's holiest madman. Every time an orc got close, their weapon would transform. Swords to salami, axes to accountancy ledgers, spears to increasingly aggressive flower arrangements.
Is this not what you wanted?
He shrieked, turning a warhammer into a life-size butter sculpture of its owner's deepest insecurities.
Behold, the mighty warriors, laid low by lactose and self-reflection.
Marta had abandoned any pretense of civilization and was simply throwing orcs. Just picking them up and yeeting them into walls, other orcs, or the fountain. One unfortunate warrior got thrown into Bessie, who took offense and bit him somewhere personal. But people were still dying. Human bodies lay in the streets. The Hendersons, young Tom the Cooper, others who just wanted peace. The sight made something cold and ancient wake up behind Brandy's eyes.
Kaleida,
She said quietly.
remember what I taught you about the bread?
Yes?
Well, sometimes the customer wants blood. And sometimes...
She hefted her hammer, and for the first time, Kaleida saw why they called her Iron Cake.
Sometimes you give them exactly what they ordered.
Rugthor arrived with the main force to find his worst warriors defeating his best warriors in the middle of a burning village. It was, he had to admit, the most embarrassing moment of his career, and that included the time he'd accidentally proposed to a swamp hag.
Enough!
His roar cut through the battle like a blade. Orcs on both sides froze, turning to see their warlords standing in the firelight, tusks bared in fury.
You dare!
He said to Granger, who was trying to crawl away from Brandy's hammer.
You dare raise steel against those under my protection! Your protection?
Granger spat blood, and possibly a tooth.
You protect humans now? I protect those who showed us honor when we showed them none.
Rugthar's voice carried the weight of command built over decades.
Who fed us when they could have killed us. Who taught us that strength comes in more forms than muscle and rage. Pretty words.
Ugluk sneered, stepping from the shadows.
From a weak, old fool. who's forgotten what it means to be an orc. Have I?
Rugthar smiled, and it wasn't a nice smile.
Then face me, Ugluk. Show me strength.
The challenge hung in the air like a blade. Ugluk had no choice. Refuse and lose all credibility. Accept and face a warlord with 3 times his experience and a sudden, burning need to make a point. The fight lasted exactly long enough for Rugthar to demonstrate 17 different ways Ugluk had failed to pay attention during training, and ended with the challenger unconscious and missing several non-essential pieces.
Anyone else?
Rugthar asked the assembled orcs.
No? Good. Now put out these fires and tend to the wounded. All of the wounded. Anyone who complains gets to explain their objections to my fist.
Warlord,
Kaleida approached hesitantly.
The humans, they are dead.
Rugthar's expression darkened. He found Brandy kneeling beside the Hendersons, checking for pulses that wouldn't come. Her face was stone, but her hands shook slightly.
I am sorry,
he said simply.
This is not our way. Not anymore.
Brandy looked up at him, and for a moment he saw the paladin she'd been, scarred by duty, hardened by loss, but unbroken, always unbroken.
They were good people,
she said quietly.
They just wanted to grow old in peace.
They will be avenged.
No. She stood, decision crystallizing in her eyes.
They will be remembered. That is harder. That is human.
She turned to address both humans and orcs, her voice carrying despite its quietness.
You want to know the secret of human strength? It's not our tricks or our magic or our bloody-minded refusal to fight fair. It is this. We remember every loss, every victory, every small kindness and great cruelty. We carry it all, and we keep going anyway.
She looked at Kaleida.
That is your next lesson. Help me with the funeral rites.
Yes, teacher.
As dawn broke over the scarred village, orcs and humans worked side by side to repair what had been broken. It wasn't comfortable or easy, but it was a start. And in the mountains above, something ancient and cruel watched the smoke rise and smiled with too many teeth. Mahir the Godfist was not a subtle orc. Where other warlords might favor strategy or diplomacy, Mahir favored hitting things until they stopped moving, and then hitting them once more to be sure. He'd earned his name by punching a minor deity in what orcs politely called the divine particulars during a theological disagreement. The deity had survived, its dignity had not. So, when word reached him that Rugthar had gone soft, that orcs were learning human ways, that the great warrior was protecting the very meat sacks he should be eating, Mahir saw an opportunity.
A village of humans,
he mused, testing the edge of his weapon. A massive spiked gauntlet that had turned armies into abstract art.
And they've corrupted our own kind. Disgusting.
Lord Mahir,
his advisor ventured carefully.
Perhaps we should scout first. Learn their capabilities.
Mahir backhanded the advisor through a tent wall.
Their capability is dying. Gather the horde. All of it.
All 5,000, my lord?
Did I stutter? We are not raiding a village. We are erasing a mistake.
Kaleida found Brandy in the memorial garden they'd built for the fallen, carefully tending the new plantings. 3 weeks had passed since the attack, and the village had settled into an uneasy peace. Orcs and humans worked together, learned from each other, pretended that the shadow growing in the north was just weather.
Teacher,
Kaleida said.
Ruktar's scouts have returned.
Brandy didn't look up from the small rosebush she was planting.
How many?
5,000, maybe more. Mahir himself leads them.
Brandy's hands stilled.
The God Fist. I've heard stories.
He once crushed a giant's skull with his bare hands. They say that his punch can shatter mountains.
Mountains don't fight back.
Brandy stood, brushing dirt from her knees.
People do.
Teacher, with respect, there are 5,000 of them and barely 100 of us. Even with Ruktar's warriors.
Kaleida.
Brandy turned to face her, and the young orc was struck again by how tired she looked. Not weak, never weak, but tired in the way of someone who'd already lived 3 lifetimes and wasn't done yet.
Do you know why I retired here? Really?
The war. Your family.
Yes, but also no.
Brandy walked to a specific grave, unmarked but clearly tended.
My daughter was 14 when the war came. Just a child who loved horses and bad poetry. She died because men like Mahir, human and orc alike, needed their glory, their strength, their point made in blood.
She touched the grave marker gently.
I swore that I was done. No more crusades, no more righteous fury. Just bread and quiet and maybe, finally, peace.
A rueful smile.
Seems the universe has other plans.
We could run.
Kaleida offered quietly.
Evacuate the village.
Could.
Brandy agreed. Won't.
Running teaches the wrong lesson. And besides...
Her smile gained an edge.
I'm curious to see if Tanner's theoretical maximum of psychological damage really is achievable in battlefield conditions.
You are all insane,
Kaleida said, but she was smiling too.
Sanity is for people who don't bake bread at the edge of nowhere. Come on, we have a welcome to prepare.
The War Council was, like everything else in Last Rest, aggressively informal.
Right,
Tanner said, feet up on the table, juggling knives because anxiety made him theatrical.
5,000 orcs, one very punchy leader, and they'll be here in 2 days. Suggestions?
Prayer?
Offered Matthew, the village cooper.
Tried that once.
Silas said.
God laughed. I assume it was laughter. It may have been cosmic indigestion. Divine communication is frustratingly ambiguous. We fight,
Rukthar stated simply.
My warriors and yours together. We'll die, but we will die well.
Counter-proposal?
Brandy said.
We win.
Everyone looked at her.
That's 5,000 versus 100,
Marta pointed out.
I'm strong, but I'm not throw 50 orcs at one strong. Maybe 45 tops.
We're not fighting 5,000.
Brandy spread a map on the table, began marking positions.
We're fighting 1. The rest, they're just audience participation.
She outlined the plan. It was ambitious, insane, and relied heavily on the element of surprise and Silas's ability to annoy people on a metaphysical level.
It will never work,
Rukthar said when she finished.
And that's what makes it perfect. When's the last time that Mahir fought someone who wasn't trying to outmuscle him?
Never. It has always been strength against strength.
Right. So, we give him everything else.
Brandy's grin was sharp enough to cut.
Kaleida, Do you still have that recipe for Miss Henderson's extra strength laxative bread?
The one she used for medicinal purposes?
That's the one. How much can you make in 2 days?
Mahir the God-Fist stood at the edge of the valley, surveying his target. The village looked even more pathetic than reports suggested. A cluster of houses huddled against the mountain like sheep before wolves. Smoke rose from chimneys. He could smell bread baking. Bread. They were baking bread while death marched toward them.
Warlord!
A scout rushed up, panting.
The village! They're having a festival. What? A festival? Music, dancing. They've set up tables in the square. And
the scout looked deeply confused.
they're waving. At us.
Mahir processed this information and came to the only logical conclusion. The humans had gone mad with fear. Good. Mad enemies made mistakes.
Form ranks,
he commanded.
Full ceremonial approach. Let them see their death coming in all of its glory.
5,000 orcs arranged themselves into perfect formation, weapons gleaming, war drums thundering. They marched down into the valley like an avalanche of green muscle and unspeakable violence. It was a sight to inspire terror, break spirits, and end hope. The village threw confetti.
Welcome to the Last Rest Cultural Exchange Festival.
Father Silas's voice, magically amplified, boomed across the valley.
Refreshments are available at the tent. Please form an orderly line.
Mahir's eye twitched.
What?
A human child, ran up to the front ranks with a tray of cookies.
Biscuit?
She offered the nearest orc.
They're chocolate chip.
The orc, trained from birth to be a killing machine, looked at the cookie, looked at the child, looked at his warlord, and made the only decision that wouldn't haunt him forever. He took the cookie.
Treachery!
Mahir roared.
Attack! Kill them all!
His forces surged forward and immediately got tangled in the most aggressive hospitality anyone had ever encountered. Tables full of food appeared in their path. Humans offered drinks, snacks, and helpful directions to the latrines.
You'll need them later,
Brandy called cheerfully. Music played at volumes that made conversations impossible, but battle orders even more so. Small children distributed flower crowns with determined efficiency. This is psychological warfare of the highest order, Tanner murmured to Brandy, watching an entire orc unit get distracted by a pie eating contest. I'm genuinely aroused.
Focus,
Brandy advised.
Where's our friend?
Mahir, for his part, had abandoned subtlety. He waded through his own confused forces, batting aside offerings of cake and good cheer, his massive gauntlets crushing anything in reach. His target was clear. The gray-haired woman in the center who was obviously orchestrating this madness.
You!
He bellowed, pointing at Brandy.
Face me!
Certainly,
Brandy called back.
But first, would you like some bread? It's fresh baked this morning. It's a warrior's blend, extra fiber.
Several orcs who'd already sampled the warrior's blend suddenly looked very uncomfortable and began edging toward the designated facilities.
I am Ursnak the Godfist. I have crushed armies, broken champions. I will not be mocked by a baker!
Oh, I'm not mocking.
Brandy set down her tray, brushed flour from her hands.
I'm offering context. You see, in about 10 minutes, roughly half of your army is going to be violently ill. The other half is going to be too confused to fight. And you, she smiled, you're going to learn why I retired.
Mahir charged. There are moments in life when time slows down, when every detail becomes crystal clear, when you realize you've made a terrible mistake. For Mahir, that moment came when Brandy didn't move. She stood perfectly still, watching him approach with the detached interest of someone observing a mildly unusual weather pattern. His gauntlet, capable of shattering stone and steel, swung toward her head with the force of divine judgment. She tilted her head exactly 3 inches left. The gauntlet passed through empty air. Mahir's momentum carried him forward, directly into Brandy's rising knee. There was a sound like someone stepping on a bag of walnuts. The Godfist discovered that there are certain parts of anatomy that remain vulnerable regardless of divine punching history.
First lesson, Brandy said conversationally as Mahir wheezed. Power means nothing if you can't hit what you're aiming at.
He swung again, wild with rage and other sensations. She flowed around it like water, her hammer appearing in her hands between one heartbeat and the next. He swung again, wild with rage and other sensations. She flowed around it like water, her hammer appearing in her hands between one heartbeat and the next. The warhammer-turned oven paddle caught him in the ribs with a crack that echoed across the valley.
Second lesson, anger makes you stupid. I should know. Spent 20 years angry at everything.
Mahir stumbled back, genuinely confused. This wasn't how fights worked. He hit things. They broke. That was the natural order. This woman was violating fundamental laws of violence. Around them, chaos reigned. Silas had turned the battlefield into a philosophical nightmare, with weapons becoming increasingly abstract concepts, and orcs questioning the nature of reality. Tanner's illusions made every shadow a threat and every threat a shadow. Marta was hosting an impromptu strongman competition that had drawn away Mahir's best warriors. Even Bessie the goat was contributing, having developed a taste for orc ankle armor. But in the center, 2 warriors faced each other in the oldest dance of all.
You are weak.
Mahir snarled, trying to regain momentum.
All tricks and clever words. No true strength.
Maybe,
Brandy agreed.
but here's the thing about true strength. It's heavy, exhausting, and eventually.
Mahir swung again. She stepped inside his reach, brought her hammer up in a perfect arc that would have made her old weapons master weep with joy. It caught Mahir under the chin, lifting all 400 pounds of him off his feet.
It runs out.
He crashed down, tried to rise, found Brandy's boot on his chest and her hammer at his throat.
Third and final lesson,
she said quietly, all humor gone from her voice.
Strength isn't about what you can break. It's about what you can build, what you can protect, what you can choose not to destroy, even when every instinct screams for blood.
She looked around the battlefield turned festival, where orcs and humans were gradually realizing the fighting had stopped. Many of Mahir's warriors were clutching their stomachs and questioning their life choices. Others were wearing flower crowns and looking confused about it.
Your move, Godfist. Do you want to be the warlord who lost to a village? Do you want to be the one smart enough to recognize when the world has changed?
Mahir stared up at her, this gray-haired baker who dismantled him like a practice dummy. He could keep fighting, order his forces to continue the assault, maybe win through sheer numbers. But he thought about that cookie the child had offered, that genuine welcome in the voices that should have been screaming. The way Rukthar's warriors and these humans fought together like family. His voice came out smaller than intended.
I don't understand. Neither did we,
Kaleida said, appearing at Brandy's shoulder.
but we learned. You can too, if you are strong enough to try.
The challenge in her voice was obvious. Mahir had 2 choices: admit defeat and grow, or cling to the old ways and diminish. For someone who'd built their identity on strength, it was the hardest decision imaginable.
I yield,
He said finally.
I yield.
The transformation of the Gristlefang Valley took time, patience, and an unconscionable amount of baked goods. Not all orcs accepted the change. Some clans retreated deeper into the mountains, clinging to traditions of making right. But many stayed, curious about these humans who fought with words and kindness as much as steel. Mahir himself became an unexpectedly enthusiastic student, though he never quite mastered the art of pulling punches.
Oh dear God! It's a metaphor!
Silas screamed, watching the former Godfist literally pull his punch so hard that he dislocated Silas's shoulder.
A metaphor! Metaphors are stupid.
Mahir grumbled, letting Brandy reset the joint.
Why not just say what you mean?
Because, sometimes, Brandy explained patiently, what you mean is too big for direct words. Like trying to fit the ocean in a cup.
Then get a bigger cup.
And that, Tanner announced, is the most orc thing anyone has ever said. I'm getting it tattooed on my body. The village expanded, becoming a genuine cultural exchange. Young orcs learned human crafts and cunning. Young humans learned orcish strength and directness. Kaleida established the first integrated bakery dojo, where students could master both the art of bread and the art of war, often simultaneously.
Need with purpose.
She barked at her students.
Every fold is a strike. Every rise a recovery. Your those that fear you, but respect you. Also, Jackson, stop eating the raw flour. That's weird.
Rugthar and Brandy formed an unlikely friendship, bonding over the challenges of leadership and the scars of old wars.
Yes. Do you regret it?
He asked one evening, sharing tea that would have appalled their younger selves.
The violence, the victories.
Every day, Brandy admitted. But regret's just wisdom wearing work clothes. The question is, what do you do with it?
Rugthar considered this.
Humans are complicated.
Wait until you learn about our tax system.
Now you're just being cruel.
Above the valley, carved into the mountain face where all could see, new words replaced old clan markings. We may be retired. We're not done. And in the bakery, at the heart of it all, Brandy's Orc Crunch biscuits became the stuff of legend. Hard enough to use as weapons, delicious enough to stop wars, and proof that sometimes the best way to conquer your enemies is to feed them first. Though she did keep the laxative recipe, just in case. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, which Kaleida found personally offensive. Tuesdays were bread days, and interruptions were unwelcome.
Teacher,
She called, not looking up from her dough.
official-looking messenger at the door. Should I hit them with something?
Only if they're selling something.
Brandy replied from the oven. At 65, she moved a bit slower, but hit just as hard when necessary.
What do they want?
Kaleida scanned the letter, her expression growing increasingly complex.
The High King wants to award you the Order of the Platinum Star for services to interspecies relations and innovative combat techniques.
Tell him I'm busy.
There's a ceremony with speeches
Definitely busy.
and a parade.
Brandy emerged from the kitchen, flour in her hair and murder in her eyes.
A parade?
With jugglers.
I hate jugglers. They remind me of politicians. Lots of things in the air, but nothing in their hands.
Kaleida grinned.
I'll write a polite refusal. Maybe include some biscuits as consolation.
Make them the extra hard ones. Let them understand what they're missing.
Outside, the village of Last Rest hummed with life. The air carried strange combinations. Yeast and weapon oil, cinnamon and leather, the ozone tang of divine magic mixing with forged smoke. The new buildings showed their hybrid heritage. Human wood carving flowing into orcish stonework, creating structures that looked both elegantly detailed and capable of withstanding a siege. Window boxes full of herbs sat beneath arrow slits. Decorative ironwork that can double as defensive spikes adorned the bakery. Orc children played with human children, their war cries mixing with laughter. Mahir led a philosophy circle, mostly consisting of him metaphorically punching concepts until they made sense. Sometimes physically. The sound of his fist hitting the demonstration board, a much-abused piece of oak, punctuated his lessons on metaphysical truth. Silas had opened a theological bakery called Bread Thoughts, and no one fully understood, but everyone frequented. The smell of his experimental enlightenment loaves made passing philosophers weep with either revelation or regret.
Any regrets?
Kaleida asked. She stood in the doorway of her bakery dojo, with a scent of rising dough mingled with sweat and the faint ozone of miscast prayer books. Students inside practicing kneading techniques that doubled as joint locks. Brandy considered. Just one.
Oh?
I should have made the laxative bread stronger. Watching Mahir's army sprint for the latrines wasn't quite as funny as it could have been.
Kaleida laughed, the sound echoing off mountain stone and mixing with the clang of Martha's hammer. The buzz of daily life, the small defiances that built something larger than any of them had imagined. In the end, they hadn't just broken a warlord. They'd broken the idea that breaking was the only way to win. And that, Brandy thought as she returned to her ovens, was a legacy worth leaving. Even if it did come with too many dinner parties and not enough appreciation for good tactical bread deployment. The goat, for her part, had developed a taste for military medals and was eyeing the messenger's decorations with intent. Some things, after all, never changed, and that was perfectly fine.